I don't know about its policy, because the Biden administration did copy a lot of Trump policies. For example, they got rid of Remain in Mexico, whereby Trump took people and said, you've got to go to Mexico and make a claim. You can't do it here.
Right.
He got rid of that. People said, oh, because of that, the numbers went up. I don't agree with that. I think the numbers were coming.
But why did the numbers go up?
I told you, because there were push and pull factors. A, the economy was opening up. Let me finish the sentence. The economy was opening up after COVID. The US economy, despite Trump's claims, was amazing on Biden's watch in terms of growth and jobs, record jobs growth. So when you have record jobs growth, people come for work. You need people from abroad, legal immigration. And number two, there was a lot going on in the Northern Triangle, in a lot of these Central American countries, a lot of crises, some crises that we've caused. Joe Biden wasn't that person. Hillary Clinton wasn't that person. Tony Blair and Gordon Brown weren't those people. Keir Starmer is not that person. Keir Starmer and Shabana Mahmood are to the right of...
Right then, Mehdi Hasan versus the Trigonometry lads. This is happening, and I am absolutely here for it. Look, if you don't know Mehdi Hasan by now, you haven't been paying attention. The man built Zateo from the ground up after MSNBC let him go, and he's been on an absolute tear ever since. Georgetown just brought him in as a visiting fellow to teach people how to actually argue, which tells you everything about how seriously people take this guy. Now, trigonometry, Constantine and Francis, they fancy themselves as these free speech warriors, right? So what happens when they sit down with someone who actually knows how to debate? We're talking the Israeli lobby, we're talking immigration, we're talking the Iran deal, the big, messy stuff that actually shapes policy. This is going to be good. Subscribe if you haven't already, because we're diving in.
China spends huge amounts of money shaping US foreign policy if it can. So does Qatar, so do lots of countries. So I guess the thing that I'm trying to get to the bottom of, because it's such a big talking point in the US right now, is what is the supposed mechanism by which this tiny country of Israel has this outsized power over the president of the United States?
So a couple of things. One is, it's not mutually exclusive, is it, Constantine, to say that Donald Trump has responsibility. He's a grown man. He may not act like a grown man, but is a grown man and has to take responsibility for decisions he makes. That's not mutually exclusive with saying, but the Israelis also tricked him, manipulated him, lobbied him, bullied him, pressured him. Both of those things can be true at the same time.
All I'm asking is, what is the mechanism?
Okay, so let's come to that. But we accept that both those things can be true.
Of course, yeah.
So now we come to what is the Israelis doing. You would accept that. You just listed a bunch of countries, and the Gulf, the Qataris have a lot of influence, the Emiratis have a lot of influence, the Russians, sadly, have a lot of influence with Trump. You would accept that none of those countries come close to Israel's influence. I don't think there's any question mark about Israel's influence on American policies. The question you're asking about is how.
What's the mechanism?
But no one would deny. I mean, you watched the Ted Cruz interview with Tucker Carlson that went viral not long ago. Cruz says, I came into politics to defend Israel. They don't say that about any other country. I've never heard an American senator say, I came into politics to defend Belgium. Never heard it. Never heard anyone talk about any other country the way.
Just to interject one more thing, if I may. That's not necessarily evidence of Israel having influence. It might well be a case of there are lots of people who live in America who believe, for whatever reason, for religious reasons or for geopolitical reasons, that this is a country with which America should have a close alliance.
So 100% I agree with you. There are Christian evangelicals in this country who believe that the rapture will happen when all the Jews are gathered in this place, and they are even more hardcore pro-Israel than a lot of pro-Israeli Jews. That's 100% true. But there are also a bunch of people in American politics. I know, I've met them, I've interviewed them. They tell me this on and off the record, who are supporting Israel because they're worried about being primaried. They're worried about losing their jobs. They're worried about being called anti-Semitic. They're worried about being targeted by AIPAC. They're worried about being targeted by their political opponents, et cetera, et cetera. The idea that there isn't a very, very powerful pro-Israel lobby is absurd. Just as there is a very powerful gun lobby, just as there is a very powerful farmer lobby, right? It's funny that when we in this city, people are happy to say, you're owned by the gun lobby. But for good reasons, because of anti-Semitic tropes, people don't want to say you're owned by the Israel lobby.
There's a good reason.
There is a good reason
for it.
But the fact is,
let me just
there is an Israel lobby that has massive oversized influence on American politics.
The distinction I'm trying to make, and I think it's an important one, and it's good that we're exploring this, which is, I think the reason people worry about calling it the Israeli lobby versus the gun lobby is the Israeli lobby implies some kind of foreign influence, right? Whereas the point that I think you and I are both making, actually, in agreement on, is there are lots and lots of Americans who, for whatever reasons, their own personal reasons, view this as an important strategic alliance of the United States or a religious worldview or whatever. So, and I think that's where the distinction becomes difficult.
I think you're, in good faith, overstating the other part of the argument, maybe for argument's sake or devil's advocacy. All I'm saying is, let me give you one example. When you ask Democratic voters, do you support what Israel's doing in Gaza? 8%, according to one poll, said we support it. The
Democrats don't support it.
The vast majority don't support it. But when you go look at Democrats in Congress, the vast majority do support it. There's an absolute disconnect. The numbers are reversed.
And why is that?
That's exactly my point. Why is that? It's not because they're all out for self-interest. It's because they're lobbied by various lobbies, the military-industrial complex, which also has interest in war, the pro-Israel lobby, vast influence that there's money in politics that influence a lot of positions in this country. You're in this town, this whole town is very corrupt, right? The way you influence people is through money, and the same thing with Israel. By the way, you mentioned foreign lobbying. Well, I said Israel lobby, not Israeli lobby, the lobby for Israel. That can be Americans. But let's just be clear, there's a long history of people trying to get the pro-Israel lobby to register as a foreign agent, just as some pro-Arab lobbies have to register as foreign agents. You go back to RFK, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., he wanted to register the precursor to AIPAC. Senator William Leahy, very famous Democrat senator in the 70s, said we should register as a foreign lobby. So there's been a debate for a long time as to whether AIPAC and other such groups should actually register, because they do seem to coordinate with the Israeli government. So that's a separate issue. But look, I take your point. There are many Americans who support Israel. But if you look at the polling, Konstantin, you're in DC at a time when, in astonishing polls I never thought I'd see in my lifetime, that Americans have now switched. They are now supporting Palestinians more than they support Israel. First time in my lifetime. I never thought I would see those polls. Sadly, it took a genocide and tens of thousands of Palestinians to get Americans to switch their positions. But again, if that doesn't translate into Congress, into the presidency, then you have to ask why. Do we have a democratic crisis?
Well, 70% of Republicans support Israel over
Republicans, but the American public,
and the Republicans,
independents and Democrats,
but the Republicans are in power, so that would explain.
But they should also respond to public opinion. It's not like when Democrats they only follow the base. They spend their whole life chasing swing voters.
Oh, this is exactly what I needed to hear. Mehdi just laid it out clean and simple. The disconnect between what voters actually want and what their elected officials do is staggering. And here's the thing Konstantin keeps dancing around. He wants to frame this as Americans just naturally loving Israel, for religious or strategic reasons. And sure, some do. But Mehdi's point about Ted Cruz saying he came into politics to defend Israel? That's not normal. That's bizarre. Name another country. Name one. You can't. What Mehdi's doing here is something most people in American media won't touch. He's pointing out that when 8% of your base supports something, but the vast majority of your representatives vote for it anyway, that's not democracy working. That's money working. And the AIPAC thing, people forget RFK wanted to register them as a foreign agent decades ago. This isn't some new conspiracy theory. This has been a documented concern for half a century. Senator Fulbright raised it. Senator Leahy raised it. But the conversation gets shut down every single time because the moment you mention it, you get accused of anti-Semitism. Mehdi threads that needle perfectly, though. He's not saying Jewish Americans are secretly controlling things. He's saying there's a lobbying apparatus that functions like every other lobbying apparatus in Washington. Pharma does it. The NRA does it. But somehow this one is untouchable? The polling shift he mentioned is historic, by the way. Americans now sympathizing more with Palestinians than Israel for the first time ever. And yet Congress acts like nothing changed.
Don't know about that.
Well, but look at Kamala Harris's election campaign. She didn't go to the left.
Interesting. So but coming back to the Democrats, it's an interesting point you make. So your contention is Democratic politicians fear AIPAC and...
Yes, we're meeting in DC just after a bunch of primaries in Illinois. AIPAC dumped millions of dollars to defeat the critical
Lots of lobbies dumped millions of dollars.
I agree. We said that.
But your claim is that the reason Democratic politicians ignore their voters' concerns about the Middle East, for example, is because of something like AIPAC.
Yes.
Okay, fair enough. And so how do you think this conflict will go on from here?
It's very hard to know. We're in uncharted waters. I've said since 2003, both as a private individual and when I became a public figure in 2009, I've said this consistently that I was against the Iraq war, and I think it was one of the big disasters of my lifetime, but Iran would make Iraq look like a walk in the park. It would be Iraq on steroids, because much bigger country, much harder to topple, way more regional and international ramifications. And we're seeing that now. We're a couple of weeks into this war, and we're seeing the oil price spikes, the economic repercussions globally, the attacks on natural gas facilities. I'm not an expert on this stuff, but the experts are saying this could have 10-year, 20-year ramifications to rebuild some of this stuff. The environmental consequences in the region, the public health consequences of causing acid rain in Tehran, of course, the blowback. In this country, I always joke that, Americans have the memory of goldfish, right? 8 seconds. Right? It's hard to remember what happened last week, let alone last year. People in the Middle East have very long memories, right? Americans don't know who Mohammad Mossadegh is. Most Iranians will tell you that's the prime minister in 1953 that the US overthrew and brought back the Shah, and then the Shah led to the revolution, et cetera, et cetera. When we talk about blowback, we need to have big picture. God forbid, 3 years, 5 years, a year from now, some bomb goes off somewhere, kills a bunch of innocent Americans. We say, why? Why do they hate us? And they're like, We're like, Khamenei who? Who's he? We've forgotten about him already. I mean, this is my worry. We've seen this with every invasion. The invasion of Iraq brought about ISIS. The invasion of southern Lebanon in 1982 brought about Hezbollah, right? These illegal wars, these wars of choice, these occupations, they lead to blowback, unintended consequence, what the CIA calls blowback. And I really worry about that when it comes to Iran. We don't know what's going to happen next. To quote Donald Rumsfeld, an Iraq war architect, there's the known unknowns. We know there's some bad shit coming. We don't know what it is.
And there it is, the Iraq comparison. Finally, someone saying it out loud. Look, I remember 2003 vividly. I remember the weapons of mass destruction lies. I remember mission accomplished. I remember watching the entire region destabilize for 2 decades because a bunch of neocons wanted to play Risk with real countries. But here's what Mehdi's getting at that people need to understand. Iran is not Iraq. Iran has 3 times the population. It has actual functioning military infrastructure. It has regional allies embedded across Lebanon, Syria, Yemen, Iraq itself. You don't just bomb Tehran and walk away. You bomb Tehran and you've started something that your grandchildren will be dealing with. And the 1953 point, Mossadegh? This is crucial context that Americans genuinely don't learn. The CIA literally overthrew a democratically elected prime minister because he wanted to nationalize oil. That's not conspiracy. That's declassified history. And Iranians remember it like it happened yesterday, while Americans can't remember what happened last Tuesday. The pattern Mehdi's describing is textbook. Invasion of Iraq created ISIS. Invasion of Lebanon created Hezbollah. Every single time Western powers think they can just topple a regime and install something friendlier, it backfires spectacularly. Every single time. And yet here we are, watching the same architects of past disasters, the same think tanks, the same talking heads, pushing for the exact same playbook. The Rumsfeld quote at the end is almost poetic. Known unknowns. The man who helped break Iraq, now being quoted about what we don't know will go wrong with Iran. We never learn.
Right? They know what they're doing. I wrote a book about debating and persuasion. One of the first chapters in the book is you don't win people over by giving them facts, statistics, policy papers, polls. That's not how you convince people. You go to people's hearts, right? You get their emotional heartstrings and you pull them. The Republicans are masters of that. They appeal to our dark demons. They're like, you need to hate that person. You need to be mad at that person. The migrant, the Mexican, the trans kid, right? It works. It's evil genius. It works. The problem for the Democrats or the Labour Party in the UK is they don't have a positive version of that. They don't have a way of actually inspiring people with the same emotional messaging, nor do they have a way of channeling people's anger in the right direction. People are angry, but don't channel that anger towards the undocumented migrant who's not the reason your wages haven't gone up, who's not the reason that, you've been lost your job, even though that's what you're told. Channel it at the people who actually are screwing you over, the people who are getting massive tax cuts from Donald Trump, the people who are not paying their taxes, avoiding taxes, stashing their money offshore, the people who are running big tech companies and screwing over your kids with ridiculous algorithms and nonsense. Channel the anger that way, and I think you'll win.
Look, it's a good point, but also as well, we have to admit that there have been fundamental failings on the left. For instance, the border, having an open border.
There's no open border, Francis. Where's the open border?
Well, Trump has closed it, but before there was an open border.
It wasn't. What's your definition of an open border?
Well,
millions of illegals coming in.
That doesn't mean it's open. That just means they managed to come in illegally. That just means the border wasn't as secure as you wanted it to be.
Hold on a second.
Open border means I could just walk into America. Nobody could do that.
Well, hold on. If millions of people are able to walk into my house and I say, I've got an open door policy to my house, you go, that's not an open door policy. It just means people got in. I mean, come on.
No, I'm being very serious. If you want to use your house analogy, if you opened your house door and said, everyone come in, no, I'm not going to stop you, then fine, that is an open door policy. If people come into your house in the window in the middle of the night while you're calling the police.
That you left open.
Well, did they leave open?
Well, clearly, because the moment Donald Trump was elected, he closed the window.
Well, he closed it completely, which is ridiculous because now you can't even claim asylum, which is a legal right. Joe Biden actually deported more people than Trump did in his first term. He actually detained and deported.
We're not talking about deportations. Hold on, let's just focus on the open.
Yes.
Mehdi, we're having a great discussion. And we're really.
Sorry, you triggered me with open border. But
clearly.
Yeah.
Yes.
But actually, I think we should talk about the issue.
Go on.
And we don't get triggered about it.
Go on.
Oh, you triggered me with open border. Yeah, Mehdi. Same here, mate. Same here. Because this is the thing, right? The phrase open border is doing so much political work and it's completely fabricated. Francis says millions of people walking in means open border. No. That means people crossed illegally despite enforcement. Those are 2 fundamentally different things. And here's what the clip doesn't mention. Joe Biden actually increased border funding. He expanded detention capacity. He continued building sections of wall that were already contracted. The deportation numbers Mehdi cited? Accurate. Biden's administration removed more people in certain periods than Trump's first term. That's not open borders. That's enforcement that doesn't get photographed for campaign ads. The house analogy Mehdi used was perfect. If someone breaks into your house through a window you accidentally left unlocked, that's not an open door policy. That's a security gap. But the MAGA framing needs it to be policy, needs it to be intentional. Because if it's just a complex systemic challenge requiring nuanced solutions, that doesn't fit on a hat, does it? And notice how quickly Francis pivoted when confronted with definitions. Well, Trump closed it. Right. By ending asylum, which is an internationally recognized legal right. He didn't fix the border. He just made it illegal to seek help at all. The right doesn't want border solutions. They want border content. They want footage and fear and something to point at while billionaires pick pockets.
I always give the stat. I came to Britain in 1996. When I came to Britain, 55,000 people a year net were coming in legally. More people now come into Britain illegally every year. Now, to me, you can argue about language, but when you have that, and in this country, in the United States, literally millions of people coming in illegally, and you can see that when there's a change of administration, that stops.
Okay.
You can disagree with us, at the extremes, okay. and I think probably all of us do. But that, to describe that as an open border policy, I think it's quite reasonable, don't you?
No, because open border suggests anyone can walk into America. And that's
they
not true.
did. Millions of people did.
And millions of people didn't. Millions of people got detained. Millions of people got mistreated in camps. I mean, Joe Biden was not some dove on the border. Biden and Harris put together the most draconian border security legislation, which, by the way, Trump told Republicans not to vote for because he wanted more people to come in so he could win the election. But they put together, I'm on the left. I was criticizing Biden and Harris for being hawks on certain things. For example, child separation. For example, putting children, all of this stuff. They borrowed a lot of Trump policies. For the first year of their administration, they kept the same rule that Trump used under the pandemic to just kick people out, which was a nonsense rule. Did a lot of people come in? Of course they did. Record numbers came in. But again, why? Was it just because of an open border, or was it because of push factors, not just pull factors? What was going on in Central America in 2021 and 2022? The actual crises that drove people out, not just economic migrants, but yes, refugees as well.
This is where you're triggering me with all respect, because I walk around the United States.
It's called trigonometry. Just keep triggering each other.
So that's why we're having this discussion. I mean, as I walk around the cities of the United States, and we travel here regularly, I'm shocked by the number of homeless people, right? And you could say, well, look, the push factors, the people who don't have somewhere to live, so that's why they're coming into your house. No, they're coming into your house because you've left the door open. And that's what was happening under the Democratic Party.
So that's not quite true. So let's look at the numbers. When Biden left office, right, in 2024, there were fewer people coming in than in Donald Trump's last year of office in the first term. That's just a fact. Go look at the numbers. The trends were down. You've got to look at trends. Clearly, there was a peak. I'm not disputing that.
Okay.
In 21, 22, huge peak. I was at MSNBC. We covered it all the time.
With that point,
but the point is, if it was an open border, why didn't they stay? Why didn't it stay up? Why did it come down?
Because they realized it's a problem and they were trying to deal with it.
So then we agree there wasn't an open border.
No, there was an open border.
Okay, for 1 year, they were really bad at border security. Yes, let's concede that.
Okay. So we remember how we started this conversation. Francis actually I think you guys were agreeing a lot, but he said the left had failings, right? And one of those failings was the failure to enforce the border. And you've just conceded that in your telling it's 1 year. I would argue it's a longer thing.
Fine.
And it's interesting to me because I wrote about this in my book, actually, that the Democratic politicians and left-wing politicians in our country talked about the importance of border security and managing immigration well and carefully for decades. And then there was this moment, which meant, let me present the argument and you tell me what you think about it. My sense is there was a cultural view that immigration good, illegal immigration isn't illegal immigration, it's all asylum seeking. There is nobody who's trying to get in illegally. Everyone is trying to just find their way to a better life. And there was a cultural shift, which a lot of people call woke, where that was perceived as the morally right thing to do. And that's why across Europe and the United States, people in power, not just left-wing, by the way, but across the political spectrum, did leave you argue with the quibble with the word open, failed to have the border policies that the people of their countries repeatedly voted for. And that is one of the reasons Francis, I think, is arguing the left got the kicking that it did.
Well, can I untangle those two things? One is the electoral thing, which is a much more complicated issue. I don't know if we have time to talk about why did they get the kick in different places. There's incumbency, there's inflation. We've talked about many things. Populism, agreed. Clearly, immigration played a role. I'm on the left. So when you say the left failed, you might not like this, the no true Scotsman fallacy. The left hasn't been in power, right? And Tony Blair was not the left. Gordon Brown was not the left. David
hold
Cameron
on.
and George Osborne were not the left.
You can't play this game.
I can, because I criticise them from the left. If you tell me that there was an open border, I would say Tony Blair spent his whole life being hawkish on border. He gave asylum seekers vouchers. I spent most of the 2000s attacking Blair for being cruel to asylum seekers. Gordon Brown talked about British jobs for British workers. People say you sound like Nick Griffin if you remember 2010.
I do.
And then, for example, here in the US, Biden and Harris were way to the right of me on the border. Kamala Harris said, do not come. She went to Central America and said, do not come. Doesn't sound like someone with their door open to me.
But they did leave the door
That's a separate
open.
argument. But she
In practice,
you can't have
they
the
left the
analogy
door
which
open.
okay, so in practice, people got in. I've never disputed that. Your argument was you opened the door, said come in. There's no evidence of that.
My argument is the fact that people at one point were not able to come in, and then they were, is evidence of a shift in policy. Is that a fair claim?
See, this is where Konstantin makes a point that actually, hold on, let me be fair here. He's not entirely wrong about the cultural shift. There was a moment where progressive discourse softened on terminology. Asylum seeker versus illegal immigrant versus undocumented. The language wars happened. I'll give him that. But here's what he's missing and what Mehdi is too polite to say outright. The people who actually held power during most of these immigration surges? Conservatives. In the UK, it was Cameron and Osborne, and then May, and then Boris Bloody Johnson promising tens of thousands while delivering hundreds of thousands. That's not the left failing. That's the right lying. And Mehdi's point about Blair giving vouchers to asylum seekers and Brown talking about British jobs for British workers, that's documented history. I lived through it. The British left spent 2 decades being attacked for being too harsh on immigration. Now suddenly it's all their fault for being soft. Pick a lane. What frustrates me is this revisionist memory where the centre-left gets blamed for policies they didn't implement while holding positions they were criticised for at the time. Harris said, "Do not come" on camera. Biden continued Title 42 for years. These aren't progressive darlings on immigration. They borrowed from the Trump playbook and still got painted as radical, open-border activists. The framing is everything. And the framing is a lie. A convenient, politically useful lie that lets actual policy failures disappear behind vibes and perception.
I don't know about its policy because the Biden administration did copy a lot of Trump policies. For example, they got rid of Remain in Mexico, whereby Trump took people and said, you've got to go to Mexico and make a claim. You can't do it here.
Right.
He got rid of that. People said, oh, because of that, the numbers went up. I don't agree with that. I think the numbers were coming.
But why did the numbers go up?
I told you, because there were push and pull factors. The economy was opening up. Let me finish the sentence. The economy was opening up after COVID. The US economy, despite Trump's claims, was amazing on Biden's watch in terms of growth and jobs, record jobs growth. So when you have record jobs growth, people come for work. You need people from abroad, legal immigration. And number 2, there was a lot going on in the Northern Triangle, in a lot of these Central American countries, a lot of crises, some crises that we've caused, with people coming in. So there were many, many factors. Was it also liberal bias? Maybe. But this idea that, the left, you said the woke, want to virtue signals to be, everyone's an asylum seeker.
I didn't say virtue signal.
Okay, but the implication being they want to look good by saying everyone's an asylum seeker, no one's illegal.
No, that wasn't my implication. You feel free to answer once I just address this. It's not an implication thing. I think it's a change of worldview that happened. People changed how they thought about this issue.
On the ground, maybe. I wish it changed in government. This is what's amusing me listening to you guys. I wish these people existed in power. They don't. Joe Biden wasn't that person. Hillary Clinton wasn't that person. Tony Blair and Gordon Brown weren't those people. Keir Starmer is not that person. Keir Starmer and Shabana Mahmood are to the right of David Cameron in many ways on this issue.
They talk like they are.
Well, talking's bad because it has effects on the public and on our discourse. So I wish these people existed that you're telling me exist. Yes, there are people on the left who I know and I'm part of who did take a much more open borders stance, who did say, actually, a lot of these people are asylum seekers and you shouldn't demonize them all. I'm not sure I saw that in policy or in government. I wish, maybe I missed it, but I didn't see Joe Biden make the case emotionally for refugees and asylum seekers during his administration.
But I'm just a little confused here, Mehdi, because your point about push factors, I think is true. More people want to leave countries when there's economic problems, etc. But you can't deny that policy shifts change the number of people who will come through a door, depending on whether that door is ajar or open or closed.
But if the alternative policy, as Francis said, was, will Trump shut the border? Do I agree with that? No, that's ridiculous. Do I believe in building a wall? No, we have to allow migration into this country because we need it for the economy. And we have to allow asylum seekers in this country because it's the legal thing to do. It's our obligations under multiple international conventions and US law. He's blocked all of that. Would you agree that people should have a right to asylum in the US?
I think my view on asylum is very simple. And this was true for Ukrainian people in my family, which is that you should apply for asylum in the area that you're in, and then if you're approved, you get to travel to the country. We shouldn't have people crossing.
So you would change all international law and US law?
Absolutely.
Okay, but right now,
absolutely.
we haven't changed that. So under our current legal obligations,
The
people
solution-
should have a right to claim asylum.
Hold on. The solution to asylum is actually very simple, which is you set up asylum processing centers near the countries where there's war and conflict and so
Agreed.
on. And then you filter out the people you want to come.
So I don't necessarily fully disagree with you. What's interesting is a lot of these solutions require people with good faith, good intentions, competence, funds.
Look, I need to sit with this for a moment because what Mehdi just did there, he threaded a needle that most political commentators don't even attempt. He acknowledged the complexity. He said, yes, policy matters, and yes, push factors matter, and yes, the economy opening up created pull factors. He didn't pretend immigration is simple. And then, when Constantine suggested changing international asylum law entirely, Mehdi just calmly said, okay, but right now, we haven't changed that. That's the entire debate in one sentence. Because here's the thing that's been running through this whole conversation. The right wants to critique systems they have no intention of actually replacing with anything functional. They want asylum processing centres near conflict zones. Brilliant. Fund them, staff them, build them. Who's blocking that? Who keeps gutting foreign aid budgets? Who keeps defunding the State Department? The same people screaming about the border. And this is what ties together everything we've watched today. Whether it's lobbying influence, or foreign policy, or immigration, the pattern is identical. Create the problem, refuse to fund the solution. Blame the left for the chaos, repeat. Mehdi made a point earlier that I keep coming back to. He said, I wish these people existed in power. The mythical open borders progressive who wants everyone in, no questions asked. Where are they? Name them. Because Biden continued Trump's policies. Harris told people not to come. Starmer is outflanking Tories on enforcement. The boogeyman doesn't exist. What does exist is a media ecosystem that needs that boogeyman to survive. Because if you admit the centre-left has been restrictionist for decades, if you admit that legal asylum is actually the law, if you admit that economic migration happens because employers want cheap labour, then suddenly the villains disappear. And you're left with systemic problems that require boring, competent governance. And boring, competent governance doesn't get clicks. It doesn't fuel outrage. It doesn't win elections. This is why I keep watching Mehdi. Whether it's Zateo or his teaching work at Georgetown, or these podcast appearances, he does something radical. He knows the history. He knows the policy. He refuses to let framing replace facts. That's rare. That's valuable. And apparently that makes you controversial in 2026. The Trigonometry hosts aren't stupid. They're engaging in good faith more than most. But they've absorbed a worldview that the mainstream media constructed for them. And they're treating that worldview as reality rather than narrative. That's the gap. That's always the gap. So what do we do with this? We question, we verify. We stop accepting that someone being loud and confident means they're right. We demand receipts. We look at who benefits when certain stories dominate and certain stories disappear. I genuinely appreciate all of you sticking through this entire thing with me. If you found this useful, if you want more breakdowns that actually dig into the substance instead of just reacting to headlines, subscribe. Hit that notification bell. Let me know in the comments which argument hit hardest for you, because I'm genuinely curious. And speaking of holding narratives accountable, I just did a video where Brian Tyler Cohen absolutely dismantles this MAGA commentator trying to spin a DHS bill into something it's not. Same energy, same refusal to let spin replace substance. You'll want to watch that one next. Links on screen. Until next time, stay informed, stay angry, stay engaged.